become like Jesus, the more freedom you'll have to see how he made you unique. And so it's paradoxical. The more you're like Jesus, the more you'll see the way that he uniquely made you, and you'll begin to live in that. And there's something kind of exciting about that. So last week, the spiritual disciplines, we started with prayer. And if you look at Jesus' life and read the Gospels, you notice that he was a person of prayer. And we talked about prayer for a few weeks. And then when you look at his life, you notice that he fasted. And that's not something that we do much of in our culture or in the church. And part of that's because we're just not used to sacrificing. We're good consumers. I'm an excellent consumer. I know my preferences better than, I know where I like to eat. I know what I want. And I can go on Amazon and just spend days thinking about all the shiny stuff that I think would make my life better. And God would just grin and say, that won't make your life better. That won't make you, it'll just help you pursue your false self even more. And so, just to repeat from last week, there's all sorts of examples in Scripture of fasting. Moses fasted on Mount Sinai. Ezra fasted for God's protection. Esther fasted for the Jews. Queen Esther and the Jewish people fasted for 3 days before she approached the king. Daniel's fast for understanding. He fasted for 3 weeks to seek understanding and revelation. Nineveh's fast for mercy. The entire city of Nineveh fasted in response to Jonah's warning. David's fast for his child. King David fasted and prayed for the life of his ill child, demonstrating his humility and dependence on God's mercy. Jesus' temptation in the wilderness for 40 days and nights in the wilderness, where he was tempted by Satan, but remained steadfast in his faith. Remember that one. As a matter of fact, if you want to, when you think about fasting, I want you to imagine Jesus in the wilderness. A creative way to become more like Jesus is, as you read the Gospels, to just kind of place yourself there, and God allows our imagination to do such. And think about Jesus fasting as you fast. Chances are none of us will do 40 days, 40 nights. I'm just saying. The disciples fasted at Antioch, and they prayed before sending off Paul and Barnabas on their mission journey. Fasting is an act of intentionally abstaining from food or a regularly enjoyed good gift from God to focus on a period of spiritual growth or deepening one's relationship with God. It's a time to humbly deny the flesh, to focus on and glorify God, becoming more in tune with his spirit, and to go deeper in your prayer life. Fasting is not merely about physical abstinence, but it's also a sacrificial lifestyle before God, demonstrating a serious commitment to him. So today what we're going to do is we typically at the end get in small groups, which we almost have a small group without having to do that. And one of the things we'll get to do by having a kind of a smaller class today is to be able to just say, because I'm going to ask you to, the issue is not fasting for the sake of fasting. The issue is fasting for a focused topic or person or idea. If you're just fasting for the sake of fasting, you're fasting to lose weight that's not biblical fasting. And the big trend right now in this, kind of fasting, what's it called when you fast in the afternoon and don't eat in the morning?
Yeah.
That's not biblical fasting at all. That's just, I'm trying to, get back in the clothes I wore in high school. That's got nothing to do with spiritual growth, the way that God would want that. There's a little bit of controversy in the church about fasting. One of those things, the Bible is clear that in Colossians there's an argument between what some people were doing. They were calling themselves spiritual by punishing their body, and that's That's not what fasting is supposed to be about. The fasting should not be seen as a means of punishing your body or as a way of dealing with guilt. Instead, fasting is increasingly understand the concept of Christian affirmation of the body and focusing on Christ. Gosh, there's traditions around fasting all through the church, and the whole idea of Lent. If you grew up in a Catholic or a Lutheran, or even an Anglican tradition, you remember they went by the church calendar, and one of the things on the church calendar had to do with these parts of time, parts of the calendar that had you focus on certain things. And Lent became a time, the 40 days minus the Sabbath, the 40 days before Easter. And what they asked the church to do is to focus, what the church asked people to do initially, and Lent is extra biblical. Fasting is not. Fasting, God assumes you're going to fast. Jesus says, when you fast. And just because in our culture we don't deny ourselves of many things, so it's kind of lost some sense of being talked about or preached about. But that's not really our option. Fasting is something that God expects us to do. But so Lent's not a biblical. What Lent did is it took a biblical idea of we're going to fast and said, hey, let's fast before Easter to get us ready for Easter. And so for 40 days before Easter, starting on Ash Wednesday, they fasted. And in the old church, because they did fasting not to lose weight or not to be legalistic, there was a tradition. So many people, part of the fasting, it's not just food necessarily, that they would often focus on their neighbors, loving their neighbors for the sake of the gospel while they fasted. And that was so profound that there was actually an early liturgy because so many people came to Christ, and there would be a baptism service on Easter Eve, because so many of the people were so kind to their neighbor as a way of fasting, that so many people became Christians that they actually have an early liturgy of a baptism service on Easter Eve. Some things to kind of be aware of. But Lent is kind of takes the idea of fasting and made a formal church-wide thing out of it and put it in the church calendar. The Catholic Church will often ask their people over the years to not eat fish on Friday. Again, that's extra biblical, but the purpose behind it was kind of initially, though. What happens with a lot of things is that they end up becoming legalistic, and they lose the reason that God had invited people to do that. The early the Catholic Church started asked people to only eat fish on Fridays. Just a little simple story. The reason that McDonald's has a fish fillet sandwich, this true story, is a Catholic franchise owner went to corporate and said, we need something that we can serve in his community on Sundays. On Fridays. And so he developed the sandwich and then sold the idea to the McDonald's corporate, and who cares? It doesn't matter. That's not important.
That's a good story.
Well, the early church, from 3 p.m. on Wednesday and 3 p.m. on Fridays, they would often, because the crucifixion, the betrayal and crucifixion. So there's just a lot of traditions that have kind of come down. Again, the traditions aren't necessarily biblical, but the practice of fasting is. There are some positive medical things from abstaining, but I was afraid that if I went there, then all of a sudden we'd be doing a kind of a, hey, you can lose weight and you'll feel better and you'll have more energy, and it's like that's I mean, those are supposed to be kind of God winking at you with a side effect of that's positive because you're being faithful, not that's the purpose. Do you know what I mean? I don't think I said that very well. I don't even know if that was a complete sentence, but I think you know what I mean.
It's not been a tradition for me. Didn't really grow up hearing in the church I was in much about fasting, at least not that I recall. But since being in the PCA, it's definitely been more present in my life. Not something I partake of very often, but we moved down here 6 years ago, and the moment that it just became clear that that's what God wanted us to do was over a fast. I mean, that just, it's a story I love to tell because it wasn't even that long of a fast. But I mean, it was like we were struggling with what's that? It felt long. But we were struggling with the decision to make. And I'm still to this day, 6 years later, blown away at how clear it just became when I was able to, because I really love food. And so removing that and being able to focus in on, you know, my prayer time and what God was calling me to do. Still to this day, it was a moving time.
Well, I'm so glad God brought you all here.
You didn't finish the story. He figured it out. He figured it out within 24 hours, and I still didn't have my answer. It took me at the end of the third day, but he didn't tell me his answer. And we had come together to the exact same answer. But he continued to fast with me, but I was just 2 days later. But it was neat how we ended up at the same point. It just took me a few days.
I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm going to just a little bit. The look on her faces y'all told that story was beautiful. I mean, it's like there's like, you want your kids to kind of go, my parents are crazy, but I want to be like that someday, And there was this look like, yeah, that's what got us here, and that was kind of neat to see. I was like, on your face. Yes.
I was very attentive too to listening to that, but then she got into the third day, and I said,
when they went over one day, I was thinking, I don't think that's biblical.
The thing that stood out to me that he was saying is there is, in fasting, one of the things that I often notice is there's like at some point almost like a fog lifts, and there's like a really crystal.
Well, I do want you to consider, as we talk about fasting, that fasting might not just be from food. As a matter of fact, when you talk about a fog lifting, screen time, television, social media, they have a way of mesmerizing us into the mundane. And isn't that, I mean, that's how I would describe sometimes I'll get on, I'll just be bored, and all of a sudden I'm, watching YouTube clips of, cats playing the piano, and I think, what, is this really that where God wants me to spend my time? I've got other stuff to do. There's a way in which it just lulls you into being mesmerized by the mundane. And so here's some ideas as you think about fasting. From a Christian perspective, fasting can extend beyond abstaining from food. It can involve giving up other regularly enjoyed activities or habits, to focus on spiritual growth and deepen your relationship with God. Television screen time, reducing or eliminating time spent watching TV or using devices. Social media, I guess they did a study on families that did a 30-day fast from media. And the first 5 days all the kids were just, it's like, I hate you. Everybody else has a phone. By the end of the 30 days, the creativity, the family was doing more things together, cooking things together, doing stuff, because you've taken away that dull noise in the back that just keeps you focused on something that doesn't matter. But television screen time, social media, boy, social media is so much about so much about comparison. We will. My wife's more spiritual than I'll ever be, and but she also is very much an idealist that wanted our family to be perfect and amazing, and it is amazing, and we're very fortunate and blessed. But almost every Memorial Day, she just has to stay off media because, you know, all these perfect families are at the lake, and, you know, we're at the emergency room at Lenore City, you know, or, you know, and everybody's kids have come together and they're all around, and, you know, and there's this, because if you want to kill joy, spend your time comparing yourself to others. I mean, it'll just destroy you. Social media, hobbies, temporarily giving up a hobby. I'm personally, you know, just to be an example to y'all, I'm not going to exercise for the next. I'm going to actually fast from that for the rest of my life. And I'm also not going to eat broccoli or cauliflower. Now there's a disciplined leader. Temporarily giving up hobbies or leisure activities to dedicate that time to the spiritual practices. Give up comforts, coffee, sweets, chocolate. Again, you're not doing it to punish yourself. You're doing it to help you focus on the idea of sacrifice. Because sacrifice is at the very core of understanding the nature of Christ. And sacrifice doesn't come natural to us. Because of our fallen nature, self comes natural to us. Does that make sense? So I'm going to just talk quickly about about kind of some practical things. In just a minute when we go, we'll probably just get into two small groups. But what I want you to think about is, remember that don't let the focus of the fast that you're going to commit to. And if you go, hey, I'm Coffield, you know, you can't make us. I mean, it's not like we have to. Then in your case, do something really, really small. Just say, okay, I'll just see if this helps me focus and be a little bit more like Christ, and I'll give up and then do something. So I'd like everybody to just try it. But focus, be practical. What will your focus be during the fasting time? And it shouldn't be on self. It's okay for it to be a question about self, like where are we going to move, or where should I go to college, or, you know, what should we do what should we do next, or something. But not, you know, not something for yourself. What will you sacrifice in order to gain a focus on Christ, especially during that time? So if you're going to give up lunch one day, don't just use that lunchtime to work and say, well, yeah, I can get more done. Use that time as what I would have done for lunch that day. I'm going to instead be purposeful and take my time. What you'll find is there's a principle in our brain that, you know, it's some people call the white elephant principle. You know, whatever you don't think about a white elephant, and what you'll do is you'll start thinking about a white elephant. And so there is something about fasting that does increase your desire for that, just because you're thinking about it. So what will you sacrifice in order to gain focus on Christ? What will you focus on during your fasting time? How long will you abstain? I'd start small, because you're not used to it, but I would be specific. You know, we're going to be, I'm not going to do this, and it's going to be for a couple of days. Or if it's going to be food, you should start real small, like 1 or 2 meals at the most. until you're kind of used to that. And also, obviously, if you have medical conditions, don't quit eating food and quit taking your medicine and say, well, I'm fasting because they told me to do that in Sunday school, and then I'll have to visit you in the hospital. I don't like going to the hospital, and be wise. If you've got an issue with blood sugar and all those sorts of things, then you probably don't need to be fasting food. You probably need to be doing something else. Does that make sense? Start small, be specific, and be gracious to yourself as you attempt this. But they're finding in research that self-discipline is a little bit like a muscle. And so therefore spiritual disciplines have a little bit of a muscle to them. And the more you practice them, the easier it is to do those things. I heard C.S. Lewis once was talking about he talks about the people who don't abstain from anything, that don't sacrifice about anything, that they'll often say to the Christian who's not living a life of excess, oh, you don't know what it's like to be tempted. And the opposite is true. If you're giving up something, you're living a much more heroic life than somebody who's just indulging in everything they want. Be gracious to yourself as you attempt this. We're not legalists. You're not earning God's favor by fasting. You already have God's favor. You're already his child. He already loves you. He won't love you more when the fast is over. And so this is not somehow to earn his favor. You have that. It's a way for you to focus more on who he is and what he wants for you, to be changed and transformed into the likeness of Christ. So be gracious to yourself as you attempt this. If you try it and you don't do well, then recommit and try maybe to fast from something else. A couple of just real medical considerations, always be aware of that. Start gradually, maybe a partial one-day fast. Ease your body into that focus. Focus on God. Breaking the fast, when you end a fast, if it's food you're fasting from, start with light foods. I remember one year for Lent, I gave up meat. And literally on Sunday morning, so on Easter morning, I snuck out of church and went and bought sausage biscuits at McDonald's, and just kind of, because it was like, I've done without meat. Where can I find meat on a Sunday morning? And I realized you all are much better than I am. I'm just saying. So for that 40 days, I'd given up eating any meat, and it was horrific on my body to start back food by eating 3 sausage biscuits from McDonald's. That's bad, even if you weren't fasting, to have 3 sausage biscuits. But so when you break the fast, start with light foods and slowly reintroduce that. Make sure if you're going to fast food, if you're going to fast food, not fast food, but fast food, make sure you drink enough water. I mean, just be practical. And the goal is not to harm your body. The goal is to focus on Christ. Decide what you're going to pursue in your fast, whether it's spiritual growth, spiritual guidance, or if it's an act of worship. And there's 2 kinds of fasts that you see in the Bible. Jesus warns people to, when they fast, not to make it about them, and so not to say to everybody that you're going to fast. But there's also examples in Scripture where communities fast, the elders fast, and so if you're going to consider fasting, I would, in the small group you're about to get into, it might be a great idea to just say, hey, I can call you. If I'm struggling with this, let me give you a call. So do that. And remember, for some of you medically, you could just do a liquid. Maybe you do a liquid fast and drink Ensure or something that would be unpleasant, but, so those are all the things that I had in terms of fasting. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions about, what's your reaction to a whole Sunday school class to talk about fasting? What's your reaction?
It's probably, it's good that we're talking about it. Let's talk about that much.
Anybody else? I see Terry. Terry, Terry comes to, Terry really is one of the leaders of Prime Time. But what I really love is Terry is incredibly bright, very well read, loves Jesus, loves the Bible. And there's not a topic that he doesn't know something about, but he doesn't want to be haughty or kind of like, but it's almost like you see when you shake a Coke bottle and you see the pressure building up, and it's like, it's gonna go, it's gonna blow. And I love Terry, because about halfway through Prime Time, it's like, and then it's like,
He's got to stir the pot.
and he's ready to go. So anyway, Terry,
But you have to understand that in Prime Timers, I've been taking lessons from.
Oh, no,
So I'm starting to get the idea that fasting, you're not talking about how rapidly we run to the dinner table.
That's true. That's true. No, that is a kind of fast that I have been very successful at.
I'm an Olympic caliber faster than that fast.
I'm with you there. Anybody else? Any thoughts about what we've said so far? Yeah.
So too, I think we need to realize too that fasting is not from when we stop eating after dinner until we sleep all night and then get up the next morning and eat. That is not fasting while we're sleeping.
Yeah, just because it says break fast for breakfast doesn't mean it really was sacrificing anything to sleep.
So it's while we're awake,
Yeah.
our waking hours.
So, with
I do have one serious thought about this. When you start out talking about prayer as it is, and the two have to go hand in hand. I think about Psalm 51 particularly, David's prayer of repentance and really want to grow closer to God. And fasting can set the stage for that, but the two of them have to go hand in hand.
well, and you'll see that almost everywhere, almost every example I gave from the Bible, they were either, it was with praying, or they were seeking God, understanding from God. Early church fasted for various reasons: preparation for baptism, mourning Jesus' death, resisting temptation to obtain revelation. They fasted in response to persecution. There's examples in the early church of fasting to care for the poor. What they would do is they would the money that they were spending on that meal, they would then go toward feeding the poor as an act of worship, addressing community needs, supporting community goals. I would, I'm going to suggest to the elders that maybe, because during this election year, that as we get closer to the election, I think it's going to be it's going to be a goat rodeo. It's just going to be an absolute mess. And I think I'm going to ask that maybe the elders would consider calling for a fast for our country. And not a fast for any one party to win or lose, but a fast that our entire country, both parties, and there would be a repentance and a movement back to God.
It strikes me just listening to this conversation and the lesson that how good God is, that everything He commands not only benefits us spiritually, but also our bodies and our minds. And fasting won't kill you. It lifts that fog. It's good in every way. And just speaks to his goodness.
Yeah, I do have a page here of things that are positive, positive results of fasting food. But again, I think that's secondary. That's just God saying, you see, if you follow what I have to do, it is ultimately better for you in every way you can possibly imagine. And there's something about us that feels like the best way to have my needs met is for me to take care of it myself. The essence of, the genesis of every sin, I mean, the river running underneath every single sin is a belief that God is not good and I'll take care of it myself. That's the river under, I'm not going to trust God with my life. I'm going to trust my own way. I said this last week, but I think one of the side lessons in the feeding the 5,000 is the fact that you can try to get your needs met with your own materials that won't ultimately work. Or you can give what you have to God, let Him break it up and bless it and use it. And then at the end of the day, somehow, in a math that's only understood in heaven, your needs will be met through sacrifice, not through I'm going to get my needs met. I'll take care of me. So with that is going to be our backdrop of our prayer time today. You may want to take notes about the people around you, what you need to pray for, because it'll help you give some focus. Let's do some, just in general, times of any prayer requests for the whole group, and then we'll divide into two groups.
You have to be praying for Tressa. She's had some kind of really nasty rash that just kind of popped up yesterday, and she stayed home today just because she broke out in hives. So, yeah.
A bunch of people have been praying for Skylar. He's fallen 4 times in the last 2 week and didn't break any. Well, he did break his nose last night, but he has not broken a bone, which is unusual. But if you would pray for him, he fell yesterday at our house. He fell going down an escalator last week. He fell. We heard him fall at like 3 a.m. He was going to the bathroom, and he was a little bit groggy, and he fell. And then at ACE, the program we have downstairs, they were at Sir Gooney's, and Palm caught him at the last minute as he kind of lost his balance. So pray for him. That would be helpful. Anything else to pray for? Yes.
My nephew TJ, who we found out he's got a cancerous tumor on his leg. He's in a cancer hospital right now, and they started 5 really heavy doses of chemo. He has to be in a hospital because they said if his temperature should go above 102, it could be fatal. So they got to watch him closely. He's diabetic, and so they're watching him closely. So he started that yesterday. So just to keep him in prayer. And then our daughter and son-in-law are traveling this coming week to Ohio, their first big trip with their family for his sister's wedding. So praying for them. Safe travels.
Let's remember, let's also remember Bob. The service is June 1st for Maryland, and he's kind of at 11 o'clock in the morning here at the church, and he's just kind of wrestling with what's it like to be a bachelor, and as he's going to face life with they've faced with such faithfulness so much of life together.
Oh, well, I mentioned this before, this Friday I've got going to Nashville for some tests and just medical tests. I just pray that those results would be clear and unequivocal, so. And then, again, I mentioned this before, my new medical person's trying to arrange more specialized testing for me. So which this stuff is sort of new, experimental, and so hard to get done, but just pray that those things would work out. And again, that I keep you know, when I get it done, whether I could get it done, but then whenever I do get it done, it would be unequivocal results either way. You know, so, you know.
Andrew, is it more physical or more psychological or both?
The testing is mostly physical things,
Okay.
but there are things that cause psychological effects, like I have a lot of problems with memory and concentration and other things, and so I hopefully will be doing some additional neuropsychological testing besides what I've done, but it's mostly medical, physical testing.
My mom is in the hospital. She's been in the hospital like 4 times this year, and she has diabetes and COPD, and effectively because of all that, congestive heart failure. And so there's just a lot to get balanced, and her potassium and keeps going low. And my biggest concern is I don't have a piece about my mom's salvation, and so if you guys could pray, one for her physically, but most of all that there would be people who would speak the gospel into her life.
Anybody else? That's the beginning of your list. People tend to do better in small groups of just kind of talking about what's really going on in their lives. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do in your small group today, or just what are you willing to fast this week, and what's going to be your main focus of prayer or devotion or worship during that time? Does that make sense? I don't want decisions like this to be made emotionally, like, you know, committing to more than you really are wanting to do. But I do think this is a spiritual discipline. Just like I would say to you, be sure you're praying this week for something. That's a spiritual discipline, and so is fasting. So if you would, share with the group any other prayer requests we have. Make sure everybody knows your name in the group. And then if you would, share what you're willing to fast this week and how you're going to do that. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe if 1 or 2 people would go over to this side, we'd be almost even. So there we go. Got 2 groups.